Hi, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you so much for joining today's Brandon Hall webinar. Today's topic is why HR struggles to prove ROI and how to finally get that executive buy-in. This is indeed a timely conversation, which we all know because HR leaders are always being asked to do more than just launch programs, support employees, and respond to the disruption that's happening in the workforce. So, in addition to that, HR leaders are being asked to prove the value or the business value of the work that they're doing, but they have to do it in a way that resonates with CEOs, CFOs, boards, all of the executive teams. So, today we're going to talk about what makes that so difficult, where that disconnect normally happens, and how HR can begin translating those people strategies into measurable business impact. For those of you that I haven't had the opportunity to meet yet, my name is Dr. Marline C. Duroseau, and I'm the Managing Director of HR and Leadership Development here at Brandon Hall. I bring a bit of dual lens to the conversation. I work deeply in HR, leadership development, and workforce strategy now, but I also come from a CFO background. Yes, so I do understand both sides of this conversation, and I also understand the human value of HR investments, right? The leadership development, the engagement work, the learning, the recognition, and the culture building aspect and the support that employees need and managers need as well. But in addition to that, I understand how executive teams look at those investment decisions. They're asking, okay, so what changed? What risk did this investment reduce? What business result did this influence? And is this investment defensible when resources are really, really constrained? And that's the bridge that we're going to focus on today. And before we go into our core topic, which I just discussed, I want to briefly frame the work of Brandon Hall. And Brandon Hall Group's vision is for every HR organization to become the catalyst that is needed for business transformation. That is really important for today's conversation because ROI is not just about financial calculation, it's about helping HR become more strategically influential, more measurable, and more connected to the business outcomes. And with that, our mission here at Brandon Hall Group is to empower CHROs, CLOs, and workforce leaders with the intelligence, insights, and guidance that they need to be able to lead boldly and drive that measurable business impact. And you'll see that reflected across our research, our excellence awards, our events, our BRIC summits, the conference, everything. And just as a heads up, the excellence in tech and excellence in education, that deadline is September 4th. So definitely be aware of that and don't miss out on that submission. And when it comes to the actual events, join us in January of 2026. We're in 2026, January of 2027 for our Human Capital Management Excellence Conference. It's always held at the Hilton in West Palm Beach, Florida. You definitely don't want to miss that. So our first poll question, so that we can get a feel for what's happening in the room, is what would you like to learn more about? Is it our Eminence program, the awards program, the 2027 Human Capital Management Excellence Conference, or our BRIC Summits? Let us know what you think and what you'd like to learn more about. All right. Thank you so much for responding to that. It really helps us understand where the interest is and where we can continue providing value beyond today's webinar. All right. So as we go through the session, don't be shy. Please feel free to use the chat box or the question box. We want this presentation to be useful and relevant to you. And I'll be moving through the content at a strong pace because I want to stay within the 30-minute guideline and be respectful of your time. But of course, if something resonates, if you have a question or you want to challenge a point, please submit that and we can address questions as we can. And finally, one quick note before we jump in, please stay tuned to the end. There will be a raffle opportunity connected to the Excellence in Action program submission. You would get a complimentary Excellence in Action program submission if you stay to the end. So now let's move into the heart of today's topic. So why all of a sudden we're talking more and more about ROI, right? Why does this conversation matter now? And this is a great question because oftentimes we find in life that things happen in ebbs and flows, right? And this conversation matters now because HR is operating in a very different environment than even a few years ago. And right now, the scrutiny of HR investment is also increasing. AI spending is accelerating, and we've heard so much talk about AI. So then you have the CFO and the boards, they're expecting more measurable outcomes as a result of this accelerated spending and the need that's happening in the HCM community now. And with that, the HR leaders are being asked tougher questions. What business impact did this create? Was the investment worth it? And what changed operationally as a result of this investment? And we have to take a step back because these questions are not meant to be hostile. They're not hostile questions. They're executive questions. They're questions that determine whether or not the initiatives that you're trying to get funded actually become funded. Are we able to scale those initiatives? Will they be renewed or will they be reduced? So Brandon Hall Group's research and client conversations, it continues to show that organizations are struggling with 3 areas in particular, which is ROI articulation, executive alignment, and business case development, right? And what we're seeing is that maturity expectations are rising. And in Brandon Hall Group's reward and recognition progression model, we find that 60% of organizations are already operating in a strategic or optimized maturity, but this matters because expectations around measurable impact also increase as a result of that. So the challenge is no longer convincing organizations that people matter. Most executives already know that because we know that without the people, we can't meet any of our deadlines. We can't get any of the work done. There would be no business outcome. But the challenge here is proving the business value of those people investments clearly so that leaders can act on it and they can fund it and they can defend it. All right. The challenge is no longer convincing organizations to invest in people. The challenge is proving business value of those investments. And this quote really does anchor the webinar because for years, HR has worked hard to make the case that people are at the center of the success of an organization, which is true, right? We can't deny that. But today's executive environment is different. Leaders are also balancing workforce transformation, technology investment, economic pressure, AI disruption, a shortage in talent, and productivity expectations. And they're doing that all at once. So that bar has moved, right? So that is the shift from going from advocacy to evidence. And this is where HR's credibility can become stronger. So the executive frustration, okay, here's where the frustration also shows up. So we know that we need that buy-in. We know that we need executives to be able to fund and defend investments. But these executives, they're not necessarily rejecting the HR initiatives. They're rejecting the unclear business justification, right? We have to move beyond, okay, well, this is something that we have to do because it's required for compliance reasons, or it's required for, whatever task that we have in the handbook. We have to go beyond that. So most CEOs and CFOs, they understand that engagement, learning, recognition, leadership development, wellness, right, and talent strategy, they know all of that matters. But what they often hear when it's being presented is that the language being used or the manner in which they're being requested funding or approval, it doesn't really answer their decision-making questions. Okay, so what they'll hear is, okay, well, engagement improved, participation in the programs have increased, employees like the program, so it was good. And guess what? Those aren't bad outcomes. They have value, right? Which is important, but they don't always answer those particular executive questions, which is, did retention improve? Did productivity increase? Did the effectiveness of the managers improve as a result of this investment for this initiative? Did turnover costs decline? How fast are we at hiring now, right? Did the speed improve? And did business performance improve? And that is the gap. So the issue is not always that HR lacks value, it's that the clear activity metrics are not always connected to the business impact in a way that executives can trust. And trust is important here. Very, very important. Executives don't need another story. We want to be able to see that credibility and expected business outcome. So, organizations lack standardized ROI frameworks. And this is one of the biggest issues that we see, where many organizations are lacking in the frameworks and having them standardized for HR and talent initiatives. And it creates more than one problem, okay? First of all, you have slow decision-making. Now, how many times, especially in your industry, and I've talked about this before, we need to act fast. We need to act fast for the sake of retention, for the sake of productivity, for the sake of competitive advantage, right? So if every initiative has a different business case structure, then executives have difficulties comparing what the priorities are, okay? So it impacts or creates slow decision-making. Then you have where, secondly, it reduces HR's influence. So when HR can't clearly show the impact, the function may still be respected for the operation, right? We have to have this function, but it's not trusted from a strategic standpoint. And third, it weakens investment justification. So without a ROI framework, even good initiatives can look good, or look like optional when the budgets get tightened. So it looks good, but then it immediately goes to, oh, well, I don't really have as much money that I thought, would be approved. So it becomes now an option versus a must do. So the goal is not necessarily to create a complicated ROI situation. It's the opposite. The goal is to create something that's repeatable and executive ready when you're able to come to them so that you can explain it. What problem are you solving? What outcome do you expect? What exactly will be measured? What is the cost of doing nothing? And how would we know whether this investment worked? So we're going to go on and catch the significance here in terms of how would you describe your organization's HR ROI maturity today, right? Would you call it reactive? Okay, measuring little to no business impact, operational. You track HR activity metrics, but struggle to connect them to the outcomes. Are you at the strategic point where you're aligning those metrics, right, to the business priorities and the business goals? Or are you optimized with your ROI using predictive insights and advanced analytics to guide workforce investment decisions? And don't worry, there's no wrong answer. Let's go ahead and see them. It's simply about understanding where organizations are in the progression. Okay, all right. So it looks like we're at operational with a good second with strategic. This is very, very good because this is what we're starting to see, where some companies are indeed in the middle. And this is where, you guys want to continue having your ROI become strategic. So very, very good. We're on the right path with that. Okay, so where are organizations most stuck? Okay, this slide, I love it. And I curated it in a way where we can really capture one of the most significant disconnects when it comes to organizations being stuck with ROI. So most organizations are not measuring nothing. In fact, they're measuring a lot. We know that, right? We need analysis on this. We need this report. We're measuring all kinds of things. So HR often measures attendance, completions, participation, satisfaction, usage, clicks, logins, everything. And those metrics are useful. and they tell us whether people showed up. So when you have that required training or that compliance in service, right? Measuring this, it tells you that yes, this actual event happened, right? So now it tells us with these particular metrics, did the people show up? Did they complete the experience after showing up, right? And whether they engage with a program or a platform. So you get that type of data. But executives are usually looking for a different layer of insight. They care about, as a result of that, how was the retention, productivity, revenue impact, the effectiveness of managers, right? Workforce risk, operational efficiency, cost reduction. And depending on what industry you're in, what drives a lot of things is the reduction of costs, right? And it doesn't always have to be negative. Can you reduce costs but still have effective operations? Okay. And performance acceleration. So the distinction that I want to make is that activity metrics explain what happened, business metrics explain why leadership should care. Okay, so if 500 managers complete the training, then that's an activity metric. But if those managers improve the retention of their team in those critical roles, or if they reduce, turnover at their team level or shorten time to productivity, then that becomes the business impact conversation. So this is why the maturity conversation matters, because many organizations remain in that foundational maturity phase where measurement capabilities are still limited. And it doesn't mean that they're not doing valuable work, which we talked about. It just means that they haven't yet the structure, the data, or the cross-functional alignment needed to prove the value consistently. Okay. And that is a really big challenge. And if HR systems are disconnected, if finance is brought in too late, or if business outcomes aren't defined up front, or if the baseline metrics are missing, then ROI itself becomes very, very difficult to show after the fact. Okay. So we're going to move on here to our HR ROI maturity gap. And this is the progression from going from activity tracking to predictive business impact. And at the reactive stage, there's no formal measurement. Okay, so HR may be viewed largely as a support function, right? One of the departments that its focus there is to help support whatever people initiatives that the company has overall. And work is happening, right, at that reactive stage, but the value is not clearly being captured as a result of the work that's happening. At the operational stage, which you'll see here, HR is reporting those activity metrics, okay, but there may be dashboards, reports, data, but the metrics often lack strategic context. Okay, so yes, I have this data, but what does it mean, right? How is it being employed? Right? So then you have the next stage, which is the strategic stage, where HR begins connecting those workforce initiatives to the outcomes of the business, the ones that are established. So this is where HR can say, okay, the leadership program supports retention and performance, or this specific engagement strategy reduces workforce risk, or with the learning aspect, this learning investment supports transformational readiness. Right? Because there's a lot of talk, for instance, now with a lot of companies with AI and AI implementation and transformation. So if you want to then invest to make sure that your team is able to make that change efficiently, accurately, and in a decent amount of time, you may have to justify that learning investment that will get them what they need in order to support them being ready for the AI transformation. So hopefully that's resonating and it's clicking. Okay. And finally, at the optimized stage, organizations begin using predictive workforce impact modeling. So now that we have all of this data, they're asking what the data tells them about future risk. Right. Oftentimes I've heard in my lifetime, the best way to prepare for the future is to really understand what happened in the past or what's happening now. Okay. So being able to find out what the data is telling our leaders about the future risk, capability gaps, productivity, retention, all of that helps with the investment decisions as well. And you see how that's just a major shift. So HR ROI maturity is not about creating more reports. We have already a lot of those. It's about moving from reporting what HR did, which is activity, to explaining how HR influenced the business. And why do traditional HR metrics fail executives? Now, traditional HR metrics normally fail for a few reasons, right? First, it often lacks financial translation, as we see here on the screen. The metric may be meaningful, but to HR, but executives may not immediately understand the financial or operational implication of that particular situation. Second, it lacks operational linkage. So you may want to know that engagement increased, because that's a good thing. We have to take care of our people, but we may not know whether that improvement affected that person's retention, their productivity, absenteeism, etc. And third, it lacks executive relevance. Okay, HR language and executive language are often very different. And I can attest to that because as a CFO, the type of topics and focuses and reports and different things that I'm looking at are significantly different than HR. So how do we bridge that to make sure that everybody's on the same page and you have that operational transition as well? And another thing is that reporting is often retrospective, which is what we talked about on the last slide. It tells us what happened after the initiative. So executives normally need predictive insight, which helps with that decision making that we were also talking about, and also planning for the future. Because having that predictive insight helps them to decide what to do next. Okay. Then we have where data can be fragmented. Some legacy HR systems and disconnected data environments, it continues to limit the scalability, right, of that particular data and how you're able to measure the maturity. And finally, impact is rarely, quantified, because normally you think of HR as people. No one wants to incorporate the financial aspect of that. And it doesn't mean that every HR outcome should reduce, down to dollars, right? In order for executives to understand, we don't want to lose that human element, but we do need to show how people outcomes connect to business outcomes in a more, seamless way. So executives do not fund initiatives because they're meaningful. They fund initiatives because they are measurable, right? So the strongest HR investments are both of them together. All right, so now we have our next poll question here. What is the biggest challenge your organization faces improving HR ROI? Would love to hear your thoughts on that. Connecting HR metrics to business outcomes, executive buy-in, data fragmentation, lack of measurement framework, right? Need a roadmap, or limited analytics and capability. Which one best describes your organization's biggest challenge? Aha. Okay. So one, connecting the HR metrics to the business outcomes, and then lack of measurement framework to do it. Yep. Thank you so much for sharing that. All right. So what executives actually want to see? And here we can just go over it. Again, we don't need more data. We just need clear business impact. So this is a great slide that basically sums up everything that we've been talking about. So we can definitely review that on your time as well. So it's very, very, important. And I'll just, sum this slide up by saying the goal, again, is to not strip HR of the human language. Okay, the goal is to connect that human outcome to business outcomes in a way that executives can act on it. Okay. All right, so from HR activity to business impact strategic framework. So this framework gives HR leaders a practical way to make that shift. And that is very, very resonant in what we saw in the poll question number 3, where yes, we want to do it, but we don't have that framework, so to speak, right? So there is a gap when it comes to having that measurable framework that will help give you the roadmap you need to get it going. So step one, okay, you want to start with the business problem, not what HR programs you have, right? We're coming at a different lens now. You start with the business problem. So instead of beginning with, we need a leadership development program, begin with the issue that the business is trying to solve. Are we having more turnover? Are our employees getting burned out? Is there a delay in the hiring process, which is causing operations to be impacted? And are productivity gaps emerging? Are your managers struggling to execute whatever change that they've been tasked to deal with? Step two, identify, your workforce drivers. What people-related issue is contributing to the business problem? Is it a skills gap? Is it a manager capability gap? Is it a recognition gap? Retention risk, a lack of leadership readiness, maybe a workload issue. Step three, connect to financial or operational impact. And this is where we quantify or estimate the consequence of not having dealt with this. Okay, so this may include turnover, cost, productivity, compliance risk. Okay, so you want to connect to a financial or operational impact of this. And step four, you want to build the executive narratives. This is where HR translates the workforce outcomes into risk, cost, growth, operational performance, that predictive analytics that we were talking about. And organizations, they gain the executive support. The ones that gain executive support are the ones that are translating this workforce strategy into the business language. And again, just make sure we remember, it doesn't mean you stop caring about your people. It just means we show how caring for people and strengthening the business are not in competition. They're not competing priorities. They are connected. Okay, very, very important reminder there. All right, so organizations gaining executive support are the ones that are translating workforce strategy into business language, and we just talked about that. So very, very good there. All right, so here are some strategic actions, for HR leaders and what they should do and some actions they should take now. You want to stop leading with HR terminology. You want to lead with business impact, like we just talked about. You want to simplify your reporting. Executives want clarity, not complex stuff, right? And complex reports and more words and more numbers. So align your metrics to business priorities. So you want to tie the workforce initiatives directly to retention, performance, growth, transformation. Build those cross-functional partnerships, which is what we're doing. And it's funny because as a person with a CFO background, yes, now I'm merging everything with the HR, cross-functional. Those partnerships matter. So you got the HR with the finance team, with the operations team, all of that needs to be in alignment, all of those departments. And also develop an ROI literacy, across your HR team. So you want to have that critical future capability. So everyone understands what's supposed to happen, when, why, all the things. All right. So turning workforce investments into measurable business impact. And this is where Brandon Hall Group can help organizations move from workforce activity to workforce impact. Many organizations are struggling to prove that HR ROI, and we can support that through our executive-ready ROI frameworks. You find where some organizations are struggling to secure buy-in, and we can help with strategic advisory alignment. Others are navigating workforce transformation uncertainty. Okay, so we can support maturity and operating model guidance because that's really important. For organizations that are facing AI investment pressure, we can help connect AI-enabled workforce transformation to the business impact measurement. And for organizations dealing with the disconnected workforce metrics, right? We can help bring structure through our integrated analytics strategy. So this is an important decision, or not decision, distinction, in the sense that Brandon Hall Group, it's not just research. Brandon Hall Group is strategic advisory, and we help organizations use the research and the benchmarks and all the things in order to make better decisions and demonstrate the measurable progress that the company would be able to make. So for the corporate HR teams, that means proving value to your internal leadership. And for solution providers, that may mean helping you prove value to your clients, and that'll help strengthening your executive position and communicate the ROI more clearly to them. So the goal is to help organizations, move the needle in a way that is credible, measurable, and tied to business impact. All right, so as we close, I want to leave you with one central message, and that's HR does not have a credibility problem. Okay, we all know that HR is credible, needed, significant, all the things. HR has a translation problem. And the work that HR does matters. But in today's environment, it's not enough for the work to just matter. It must be connected to clearly and distinctly to business outcomes. And the future of HR leadership will require that business fluency, workforce analytics, strategic storytelling, and being in alignment operationally. And of course, organizations that successfully connect workforce investments to their business outcomes, they're going to gain stronger influence and stronger executive buy-in and greater competitive advantage. And that's where Brandon Hall Group continues to help organizations move the needle. So I want to thank you today for joining today's session. I appreciate your time, the engagement in the chat, and the work that you've been doing to elevate HR's strategic impact.
Thank you, Dr. Marr. To close out, I'm thrilled to announce that Richard Duran has won a complimentary Excellence in Action program submission. Congratulations, Richard. We'll be reaching out shortly with more details.
Thank you so very much for that, Ivy. Truly, truly appreciate it. And thank you again for joining us today. You will receive a PDF of the presentation and a link to the recording within 24 hours. And you can also visit brandonhall.com webinars /webinars for all the upcoming sessions. And I appreciate you spending part of your day with us. And we look forward to continuing the conversation. And right before, if you asked the question and we didn't get a chance to answer you, we'll definitely reach out via email and do that. And just thank you all so very much for joining us today. And we look forward to continuing the conversation.